So I just wanted to share the findings of a recently published paper called The Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of the Effects of Menopause Hormone Therapy on the Risk of Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia. Now, dementia is a real concern for women. It impairs quality of life and health, and women suffer dementia, both Alzheimer's and other causes of dementia, more commonly than men. And why this is important research is that previously evidence was conflicting. So the very few randomized controlled trials, including the Women's Health Initiative, indicated that HRT possibly increased the risk of developing dementia, whilst other studies, mostly observational and cohort studies, show that it reduced or suggested that it reduced the risk of dementia. So we're left not really knowing. The difference between why this study is important is that not only is it an up-to-date systematic review where they look at all the published papers that are relevant, but it's also a meta-analysis. So they pull all the data from these other studies and they reanalyze it as if it was a single group. And they pull it apart according to the type of HRT used, whether just estrogen or combined estrogen and a progestogen, and also the timing of initiation of a therapy. So predominantly whether it was started around menopause, as it's used in the real world for menopausal symptoms, or if it was started much later, generally more than 10 years later. So what did they find? Here is a chart of their findings indicating the increased or decreased risk. On the graph on the left is the estrogen only users, and the one on the right is the estrogen and progestogen users. Important to note here that the progestogens that we're talking about are mostly non-body identical forms of progestogen and not the current body identical ones that are available mostly today. So if we look at the estrogen only users, the people below the line are the people who had a reduced risk of getting dementia, and above the line, an increased risk of getting dementia. The people on the left-hand side, the women on the left-hand side, were the users of the dashed line, users who used it around the time of menopause. To the right of the dashed line are people who were initiated later, typically 10 years after the menopause, so late users. And what we see is that there is a 32% reduction in estrogen-only users if it's used around the time of the menopause. Now, this was the only statistically significant finding of all of these numbers. We can see that the estrogen progestogen also had a 22% reduction, but it didn't reach statistical significance. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important or that it may not be true, but what it means is that we're not sure that the findings could not have occurred by chance. So when we're reading scientific papers, the researchers will set a level of statistical significance, often 0.05. You'll see a p-value of 0.05. Now, what that means is that according to statistical analysis, there is less than a 5% chance or probability that the findings occurred by luck alone or chance. Okay, so they're quite confident that the findings are true. It's a bit complicated, but that's what that means. Now, why would we see this difference between early users and late users? Now, this is really important. This seems to be supportive of the so-called timing hypothesis, where the effects of estrogen on the heart, the brain, and even the bones are more effective when used around the time of menopause. And this makes sense because our body adapts to falling levels of estrogen and also progesterone, and the cells start to accommodate and change. So the impact of using hormones may differ according to the time using them after the menopause. So this supports the timing hypothesis, where it's important to be using HRT around the time of menopause, and that starting it later may not only be not beneficial, but it might also be harmful. So should we get excited about a 32% reduction in risk? Well, it's meaningful, and a lot of people have Alzheimer's, but it's about the same magnitude as other modifiable risk factors. So being physically active also reduce your risk of dementia or causes of dementia by 45%. And avoiding things like smoking, obesity, and diabetes, which all increase the risk of dementia to about the same magnitude. So if you can't use HRT, if you're too late to use HRT, if you're thinking HRT is going to be the most protective thing that you can do, well, keep in mind that these other things that you can change are also helpful. Of course, the biggest risk factors for getting Alzheimer's dementia are getting older, which fortunately you'll hope to do. And family history for some people is important, and that's usually genetic factors around ApoA, EA, so a particular gene that is sorry, ApoE4, which is a particular genetic risk if you have two of those genes. So that's it. What we do know, this paper is helpful for showing that the time matters and that there is probably a reduced risk of using HRT around the time of the menopause, which reached statistical significance in the estrogen alone group. So there you go.